Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Frassinelli and the team here at SDE. This is our now weekly conversation with you. We appreciate you participating in this. We hope they continue to be helpful, and healthy. Sorry, it's been a long day of webinars today. So we've got a lot to cover, and I will just sort of start to give you an overview. And again, part of my rationale for this is to make sure that you guys are aware of the things that are going out to your school leaders, just so that you're in the know. As I mentioned last week, the data on hospitalizations and the data on the number of COVID cases are now being posted on Thursdays. There's a special link that provides that data on Thursdays, and we've asked schools to plan on holding conversations on Fridays to discuss what that data might mean for you. So again, make sure you're part of those conversations. There's also a standing meeting at 8 a.m. on Tuesday mornings that virtually everyone is invited to. Superintendents around, local health directors around, school medical advisors around, school nurses around. And that link has been out. So if you'd like to participate in that, there's not always a lot of, actually there's very little conversation around child nutrition, which is why we're holding these calls. But it might be something you just want to listen in. Additionally, Addendum 8 went out this week. Addendum 8 was guidance that we issued with regard to fire drills and shelter in place drills and crisis response drills. It also talks about fire doors and classroom doors. It also talks about the use of tents for outdoor classroom space or outdoor utilization for schools. Take a look at that. There's also information around requirements if you're using plexiglass partitions as room dividers or people dividers. Don't necessarily believe that that the guidance around plexiglass, which I just thought of, applies to things like sneeze guards, because they're not hanging 18 inches from the ceiling, or they're not sitting on desks and things like that. So, but check that out and follow up with your local fire chief if you have questions. There's also some contact information for the Connecticut School Safety Officer at the Department of Emergency Services, and also the Office of the State Fire Marshal is there. His contact information is there as well. So check that out. There's also, we're working with DPH to develop mask guidance, so some additional mask guidance should be out hopefully by the end of this week. So be looking out for that. Okay, with regard to child nutrition, you may have read in the paper, we received a list of, let's call them requirements, or things that we received them from the teachers union, and there were a number of requirements in there that they requested in order for schools to open. And one of those had to do with child nutrition programs, and that was that food service operations, their words, not mine, food service operations will need to comply with the restaurant guidance that was published in the Connecticut Reopen document when Connecticut issued the Reopen document for the first phase in reopening on June 17th. So I don't know if that's going to become a requirement, and we talked internally about it, and I talked with a few of you out there about it and walked through the documents. I don't think there's anything to be worried about. All of the HACCP procedures and all of the work that you guys do in terms of food safety and spacing and things you've been doing, since March. So, but just take a look at that in case that becomes a reality. You just might want to make sure that you're able to say, yep, we're in complete compliance with that. The easiest way to do that is you can actually just Google Connecticut Reopens restaurant guidance, and it comes up within the first couple of links, and you can check it out on there. It's about a 14-page document. Also, we received word last week, we received clarification from the USDA regarding a lawsuit that was brought by the Center for the Science and the Public Interest against the USDA, specifically against the USDA final rule that came out for 2018 that added flexibilities with milk and sodium requirements, and what was the third one? Milk and sodium and
Grains.
And what?
Grains. Whole
And
grain.
grains, and whole grains, yes, thank you. And so essentially what that means is that the court ruled in favor of the Center for the Science and the Public Interest. So the flexibilities that were provided in the final rule in 2018 are now vacated. And that means for the coming school year that we revert back to essentially the 2012 meal pattern requirements with regard to milk and grains and sodium. So that means that flavored milk must be non-fat, grains must be whole grain, and the breakfast and lunches served have to meet the target 2 sodium levels. So we'll be sending out some more information on that, but just be aware of that those changes. I know this is late in the game for that, but hopefully you are aware of the April decision, and we're starting to think that might become a reality. So that's that. The last thing that I would like to talk about before I turn it over to everybody else is with, the guidance with regard to remote learners. We got some clarification from USDA. And so essentially, if you're going to continue to provide congregate meals, in other words, if you're not opting into the non-congregate waiver issued by the USDA, you're just going to do straight up congregate meals, then you under the guidance, you have to, under normal regulations, which are in play for that, you have to continue to serve meals or offer meals to everyone in the building, right? So it's not just it's not just a free and reduced price students get meals, it's everybody who's in the congregate building. But if you do opt in, and you have opted in to the non-congregate waiver for the coming school year, it does mean that you then have to provide meals for remote learners as well, right? So all students have to receive meals under that program. So you can still provide, if you've got like a hybrid thing going on, and you can still provide congregate meals to the students who are in school, and provide to-go meals or non-congregate meals to the students who are remote learning. That can still happen, but you have to opt into the waiver to be able to do that. If for some reason you're not going to serve remote learners, I'd like to kind of know about that, and I'd like to know some rationale as to why you're not going to serve remote learners. Additionally, with that rule, and folks, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but additionally with that rule, if you are counting the day as a academic day, in other words, so if you're open 4 days and you're closed on Fridays, and you don't have academic activity going on Fridays, then you can't get reimbursed for those meals. You serve meals. Now, an academic activity doesn't have to be contact with the school. It can be schools can issue schools can issue academic coursework on that Friday, and if the school is counting that as an academic day in the school calendar, then you have to provide meals to those kids. Is that clear? I'm seeing some nods from my folks that's right. Okay, so let me turn it over. I think I'm turning it over to Shannon to go on some other topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. So as you might know, I'm Shannon Yearwood. I oversee the child nutrition programs in partnership with John, who's our division director. So thank you so much for joining us for our town hall series. I am extremely pleased to once again introduce our team, who is very mighty. So that's Fanola Brown, Susan Alston, and Terry Dandino. And so I see an initial question just as a kind of a housekeeping question, so I'm just going to answer that one quickly. We are going to, as you might be aware of, the Professional Support Series web page for the Department of Education. And so that has been sent out through our weekly communication with you through the school lunch tray. We are going to have a button specifically to child nutrition programs. Recordings of these town hall series along with the transcripts will be posted and made available there. So to answer your questions, if you'll be able to access this later, that's where you'll be able to access it. Once we have those up and running and ready to go, we will send that communication out to the school lunch tray of how to access those. So just to cover that quickly. So as John mentioned about the 2012 meal patterns, we really, this came as a little bit of a surprise to us as well. when USDA really informed us that this is something they're going to have to move forward with this year. The good news is that the most recent meal pattern waiver that the USDA issued nationwide allows us to be able to allow you to apply for flexibilities for your meal pattern to be able to adopt the current meal pattern instead of the 2012 meal pattern. USDA is very aware that most districts have procured their food already, that the food they have procured, the food they're planning, they've menued, may not be able to meet those 2012 requirements. We should have that meal pattern application ready to go and up on our website as of today, if at latest tomorrow. So John also mentioned that we would have the opportunity to let you opt into a non-congregate meal service. And so we are working on that waiver request application document. And so please do not be overly concerned. What we need to do is make sure that we are aware of what types of flexibilities that you are going to elect into, and we need to be able to approve those. Those are our obligations underneath the USDA as the state regulatory agency that oversees these programs. So we are doing our very best to not burden you with additional paperwork, additional administrative requirements during this time. So sometimes the shorter the document, the easier it is for you, the harder it is for us to get it to you. So we will be able to make that available to you this week. So for those of you who have not opted into that yet, you have not had the ability to opt into it yet, we will make sure you have that. That should not interrupt the planning. We know many of you have already started your school year and started your meal programs or are right on the verge of that. We are working as quickly and furiously as we can to turn around the USDA guidance and waivers. We have to analyze them to look at how they interact with Connecticut laws, how we administer our programs, the other flexibilities and regulations that we adopt here in Connecticut. So we will make that available to you as we make these available to you as absolutely soon as possible. If you have any questions about your meal programs, needing some of the ability to do these flexibilities, please reach out to us and talk through that with you. We can certainly guide you. We will make sure that you have the appropriate documentation and paperwork in place, but don't let that be a barrier to your planning. So, and again, I just want to reemphasize that we do understand that the timing on all of this is not ideal. We are obligated to get guidance from USDA in order to be able to work with you and tell you what flexibilities and what will be allowed and what won't be allowed this year. Unfortunately, some of that guidance has been a little late in coming, and so we are working our best to get that out to you and to make it as widely adoptable as possible so that you can really make the best programs that are going to reach the most kids in your districts. So I also want to reemphasize, as you see these USDA waivers come out, these nationwide waivers and the Q&A documents, please keep in mind that the USDA has to issue these guidance documents, the Q&As, and the nationwide waivers as a one-size-fits-all. And so you're really looking at their strategy to make sure that they're getting out the answers that are going to work for all states and all territories. And so we have to make sure that we, on our end, make those work for Connecticut, because what is allowable in Connecticut and how our educational system is set up in Connecticut is very different than it is in Texas or California or Montana. And so please don't make any assumptions that even though there is some language in the templates for USDA nationwide waivers, that does not mean that there's not the requirement for you to apply also to the state. We're obligated to report that information to the USDA. So just looking through my notes here. So also the application, and I mentioned this last week when we were on the town hall, but for those of you who weren't on it, this first application we're going to send out is going to be for your entire district. It's going to look very much like a selection checklist. We're trying to keep it as low, if not require any narrative. We are moving forward with being able to adopt a module within our child nutrition program's online application and claiming system to allow you to, at a later date, be able, once we have that up and running, we'll be reaching back out to you to let us know what's happening at the site level and where you implemented those waiver flexibilities. when we release this document to you to select the waivers, you might have different models for different schools under your sponsorship agreement or in your district. And so what you're going to want to do is make sure that you select each option you think you may implement throughout school year 2021. So your district might be planning to go full remote, or excuse me, full in-person, with plans if there's anything that, any safety concerns, to go hybrid or full remote. And if you think that you might be using these flexibilities, should that happen, please select all those flexibilities so that you can pivot quickly. You don't have to worry about reaching out to us in order to switch into those models that you're planning. So I encourage you to select the flexibilities that you think at any point throughout the year in any of the schools that you are working with, to make sure that you're selecting those now. Well, now meaning when we get that document to you. And so we also have had folks ask us for additional information through our amazing child nutrition program guidance and our COVID resource page. We have worked with a few of our stakeholders to be able to make sure that that information is presented to you in a really user-friendly fashion. So please check it out. We have reorganized it so that it is really obvious what information is specifically for your reopening plans and for the school year 2021. So that should be a little easier for you to navigate, and we're going to continue to be responsive to that. So if you have ideas and advice to us on what you'd like to see, no guarantees, but certainly communicate that with us because we are very responsive to those requests. So John really went through the congregate versus non-congregate options. And so I'm going to just reiterate that we as a state agency have opted into the ability to do non-congregate, which allows sponsors of these programs to also opt into the non-congregate. If you opt into the non-congregate option, that is what not only allows you to feed your remote learners, but requires you to offer meals to all learners, whether they're in person or remote. If you do not choose to do this non-congregate, you will need to figure out how to feed your children who are in your class, in your schools, using their traditional school breakfast and school lunch rules around congregate feeding. That means that no remote learners would be able to pick those meals up. We know that participation is something all of you are concerned about because that has real budget impacts for you. So we highly encourage you to select the options that are going to help you maximize the number of children you reach with these programs and your reimbursement to help support your programs. That's really going to be up to you, but we're certainly able to help you think through that. With that, I want to make sure we have enough time to go through some of the technical things that we were wanting to go over. So we ran out of time last time to address all of the questions. And so what we're going to do is if we run out of time today and at any of these town halls, we save those questions, we take them back to the team, we look at them internally, and then what we need to seek USDA guidance for, we do, and those things that we think we can address in the subsequent town hall, we will. So that's what we're going to do for these next few minutes. We're going to go over some claiming. We're going to go over different models from your hybrid to your remote. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth around those instructional operational days and how you can really figure that out for your meal programs. And then I will talk a little bit about potable water, and we're going to leave some time at the end to answer those questions that you're submitting through that question box. So please, I encourage you, as you're thinking of them, put them in the question box. Whether or not we have time to get to them, like I said, we will address them at some point, or we will be seeking USDA guidance. So with that, I am going to hand it off to the fabulous Susan Alston to take us through our first topic.
Thank you, Shannon. So one of the things that we know a lot of people have questions about and that we're going to start with today is meal counting and claiming. So we know that there's so many systems out there, and you know, you guys have all kinds of models that you're using, and we're aware of that. And there's no one size fits all system that you can implement or that we can send out to say, hey, this is how you have to do it. So what we want to make sure that you're aware of, and I'm sure that you guys know this, that no matter what model that you're using, you want to make sure that you're accurately tracking your meals, right? So program integrity during the regular school year and now is always at the forefront of what you're trying to do. So are you claiming meals that are reimbursable so that when you go and you put them into the system at the end of the month, that you can confidently say that we've claimed these meals accurately. One of the things that you want to make sure that you're doing as part of this is to, if you can, utilize your point of sale system, right? So most of you have that. Some use rosters, but if you can, that's going to be the best way that you can accurately make sure that you're tracking your meals. This will also be a great way to determine if you have second meals, right? So if you haven't thought about how you're going to make sure that students aren't coming and getting meals during the day, and then their parents aren't coming to a meal distribution site for that child, that would be a second meal. So how are you going to make sure that when it comes time to consolidate those claims, or that you're not counting them twice? Because remember, second meals, you cannot claim second meals, and you don't want to wind up at the end of the month realizing that you have all of these second meals that you can't claim, right? So you're not getting any reimbursement for those. And one of the questions that we had last week were about, pre-orders for meals. Pre-ordering is a great idea, especially for your distance learners, your 100% home-based learners, so that you have an idea of who's going to be coming to get meals. We think this is great for production. Just want you to remember that you cannot use pre-order forms as the basis to claim those meals, okay? Anything can happen between the time you're pre-ordering and then meal distribution. The child goes home, a parent doesn't come to pick up the meal, so you can't use that. On the same lines of those, we want to remind you that attendance cannot be used as the basis for claiming meals either, for the same reasons, right? You start out with 50 kids who have ordered meals or are in school, but by the time lunch is served, 4 of them have been sent home or have left for doctor's appointments. They're not receiving the lunch, so you can't claim those. One thing too with pre-ordering, you want to make sure though, just keep in mind that there may be parents or families that come to pick up meals that may not have pre-ordered, right, that are also distance learning. So you don't want to deny that child or that family that meal if they forgot to pre-order, or if they didn't have a system for pre-ordering. They don't have a computer, they didn't have internet, they weren't able to call. So always, if you're going to do that, have some extra meals available. We advise, again, use the point of sale when you can. I don't know, some of you have been talking with your software providers about ways to maybe track meals over multiple days. We don't have the answers for how all of the point of sale systems work. So we would advise, if you do have questions, maybe network with other districts that are using the same software. Maybe someone has already come up with a solution. So that might be a good thing to do. Because again, it's not one size fits all, and every district is going to be a little bit different. One other thing with meal counting and claiming before I pass it along to Fanula is remember that you need to keep your documentation to support your claim, right? So if you're using paper rosters, if you're CEP and you have some sort of clicker system that you then put on a piece of paper of how many meals were served that day, you need to keep that as supporting documentation, right? You will need to provide that for us if we're having an administrative review of your program during this time. If the town audits a specific month, that's going to be your backup document. So any paper trail from the time the parent is picking up the meal or the student's getting the meal to the time that it's being entered into the online system, you want to keep that. It's better to have too much stuff in a couple boxes or 15 boxes from this school year than to not have the documentation then, when someone's looking for it. And just a reminder with that, remember for our programs, you want to keep everything for 3 years, right? Plus the current year. So just make sure that you save everything as it happens throughout the year. And with that said, I'm going to pass it along to Fanula, who's going to kind of go through meal counting and claiming with more specifics of different types of models that you might be seeing in your school.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So I'm just going to kind of present some different scenarios, keeping in mind the regulations around point of service counts. We just really want to make sure those districts and schools that are participating and feeding kids that are 100% remote learning or through a hybrid model really have a plan for distributing the meals that's going to prevent those second meals, and really just ensuring that students are being served and you're claiming meals for each school day. So when you're thinking about and developing your plans for those 100% remote learners, if you're also participating in your school in a hybrid model where you have two groups of students coming into schools on different days, you really need to consider possibly, as Susan said, best practice would be using your POS system, but we know that that is not practical in all situations. So you may need to develop different rosters. So you are not distributing meals to your group that will be in school 2 days a week and have access to meals, and which should only be getting them 3 meals or 3 days worth of meals for the days that they're distant learning, remote learning. They're not receiving 5 meals through your distribution center for those remote learners. So you really have to think through how, certainly if they're ordering ahead, that will help identify which students need 5 days worth of meals because they're 100% remote learning, if that week is in fact a 5-day week, meaning there's not a holiday or a PD day in that week. And then maybe a roster for those students, again, those different groups that would be allowed to have 3 or 2. We've heard of models that have 2 groups that are hybrid and switching off Wednesdays depending on which group is there. So you really need to consider how you are going to have your distribution sites, your distribution centers equipped with ensuring that the children are getting the number of meals that they are allowed for you to be able to claim then once it's the end of the month. Again, point of sale using your electronic point of sale system would be ideal because then you can certainly see right there the students, but a roster potentially for those different groups or having them call ahead, but then not denying if they don't call ahead is also important. So we just wanted to present that because if you are distributing daily at multiple sites and don't have access to the POS system, it's going to be difficult. And then certainly staying on top of consolidating those claims, working with your software provider for your POS system as far as when you're inputting those meal counts to be able to identify, reach out, reshuffle or plan your distribution if you have to. And with that, I will say we have had a number of sponsors call us, email us their specific plan just to ensure that, does it seem right? Am I on the right track? Is there something I should consider? And that's obviously where we're getting some of these ideas to present out to all of you today. But please feel free if you have some questions and you're a little unsure about your plan, especially around your remote learners, but not necessarily just around your remote learners, certainly in person, feeding the children in school as well. Reach out to Terry, Susan Alston, or myself. We're happy to walk through that, make sure that you're comfortable with your plan and that you are meeting all of the regulations. So again, I just wanted to talk, that was a little bit about the 100% remote learners and then those remote learners under the hybrid model, really kind of going through your distribution, making sure that you have a good plan in place, that you're preventing second meals. And then just a little bit about meal pattern compliance, menu planning. I think we spoke a little bit about this last week, but you may need to consider those different groups when you're trying to plan menus to meet the daily and weekly requirements. So it may not be one menu that's going to be able to certainly feed and plan the daily and weekly requirements for all those different groups. So you may have a menu, and again, we're not trying to make things harder, we're just presenting some options if you are having challenges with meeting the meal pattern. And so you may need to look at those different groups and creating menus for each of those groups, depending on the food that you have available, when they're coming into school, when they'll be home. And again, you can always reach out to us if you're having any struggles with that. We've mentioned a few times the meal pattern flexibility waiver application will be coming out in the near future, so that will help those sponsors, those menu planners that are having some difficulty and need to be able to apply for that. So that will be available. And I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it over to Terry, who's going to speak more about operational and instructional days. To you, Terry.
Thank you very much. Before I get started on that, I just want to let you know that we do have 2 workshops that are coming up, and hopefully you receive the emails notifying you of those workshops. And one is tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and it's the application certification training. And then we also have the verification training that's going to be taking place on September 3rd. The flyers for those 2 trainings are attached. They are using the GoTo webinar site, so you want to make sure that you have access, and obviously you do because you are on this webinar, so you're hearing about it, which is great. John mentioned earlier about instructional time, operational days, academic days, and I just want to clarify a couple of things. I've received emails and some phone calls about operating days and how operating days are impacted because of COVID and all of the changes. And so operating days are defined by USDA, and it's the days that meals are provided to the students. And so that's considered to be an operating day. And in order to provide meals to the students, there has to be learning going on. And so you just want to keep that in mind. So for example, on a professional development day, if the students aren't expected to learn, whether it's remotely or in school, then you cannot serve meals and claim them under the National School Lunch Program or Breakfast Program. So the best thing to do is to work with your principals and your administration, because it can get a little bit cloudy, and you want to work with them to see what is a academic day. And it's important to reach out to one of us if you do need clarification, because sometimes you just look at it so closely, it gets a little bit confusing. There's no doubt about it. So we want to encourage you to work with your administration on that, and know that if the kids aren't learning, then you should not be serving and claiming meals for those days. Okay, and I am going to pass it on to Shannon.
So much. So one of the kind of big items that we keep getting requests about is the potable water requirement. And so we covered this a little bit last week, and then on the heels of our town hall, did receive additional USDA guidance. USDA takes the potable water requirement extremely seriously. So they, the biggest flexibility they've created is that you do not have to provide potable water for your remote learners who are receiving those meals from you. For those children who are going to be eating on site in your schools, you will need to still be able to provide potable water. We did submit, the Department of Education did submit a waiver request to waive that requirement and allow some more flexibility in how that is provided. We know bottles of water are allowable, but they can be extremely cost prohibitive. And so we are going to need to revise our request based on the new guidance that USDA has issued. So as a reminder, and Fanula is, I've asked her to correct me if I'm wrong with this, but the potable water requirement really kicks into place for your school lunch program. So if you're providing meals, you need to be able to provide free, accessible, potable water. Potable is drinkable, so it's water that you can consume. I know all of you know that, but I've had arguments in my household whether that's an actual word or not, and it is. It's in regulation. So that might be a personal thing. But we are going to continue trying to create that flexibility, but as it stands, we are not able to do that for you. As soon as we hear what we'll be able to allow or not be able to allow, if USDA does authorize some of those flexibilities around potable water, we will certainly let you know. I was on a meeting this morning as well that a person had asked me about administrative reviews this year. Please know that's something that we are trying to figure out ourselves, and with guidance, and we are seeking additional guidance from USDA on what that will look like. I'm hopeful we'll have enough information to be able to cover that in another town hall, but I know a lot of you have that on your radar, so I just want to address that as well. And that information on that, we are working on it. This is definitely not a time that anybody expected when these regulations were written in 1950 and then added on to since. They were not meant to be flexible in response to a global pandemic, which is part of the reason that some of this information is a little bit difficult to get to in a timely way. There are procedures that are in place that we have to follow and that USDA has to follow in order for us to be able to create any flexibilities. A lot of it has to go not just to USDA. So typically the waiver requests that we submit for non-COVID program operations don't have to go much further than USDA, but since a lot of these waiver flexibilities that have been created since the springtime do have a monetary cost to them, those, once the waiver requests and the ideas go to USDA, they also need to go to several other federal departments for authorization. And as I'm sure you can imagine, those other departments are also pretty overwhelmed with everything that's happening, and with COVID still really dictating a lot of this. So please know we will continue to try and create as much flexibilities as we can. I just wanted to also one more time go back to the meal pattern application and what that looks like. So that we are going to make that available on our website. And so the difference between what we were able to authorize and this one, and this is part of the reason it took a while for USDA to get this out, is when that court decision was issued in April, the USDA was in the midst of all of this. And so prior to this time period, that we've been able to authorize meal pattern waivers for a month at a time. We've only had those issued to us from USDA a month at a time. And then this one came out and was available to us throughout the school year. And so the reason for that is they made this nationwide waiver slightly different than what those month-to-month ones were. And part of that was in response to this court decision that changed our ability to allow you the flexibilities that you've been operating under, that you likely ordered your food and menued for this upcoming school year under. So the difference is that the authorizations we were allowed to make prior to this had to be specifically due to a supply chain disruption that was due to COVID-19. And so we now are going to be able to authorize for longer periods of time your ability to waive some of those meal pattern requirements, including being able to waive the requirements from 2012 and operate in the current meal pattern. So just know that that's pretty much the biggest difference, but you are still going to have to tell us, it's going to have to be targeted, and you're going to have to let us know how it is going to be necessary to support safe access to these meals. So that's going to be very important, and we will certainly, we're in the process of also updating our considerations document to be reflective of this shift and how we're able to interpret and authorize these flexibilities. Okay. Oh, so the other handout I wanted to point out, we have posted the reimbursement rates for the 2020, 2021, though for some reason it's hard for me to say, school year. And so that it's also on our website, also in the school lunch tray, but if you need a quick reference, please download that from the handouts as well. All right, with that, I think we can go to our questions. We have some coming in. So, all right, give me 1 minute. All right, so we do have a couple questions around, as we know, there's a lot of different school reopening plans in place. So you might have a district where certain grades are coming back in and certain grades aren't. They're ones that you have fed before. You might not be thinking you could feed those kids again, but one of the specific questions is, if you opt into the non-congregate, if we're not feeding pre-K students in school this year, can we feed those pre-K students in a non-congregate way? And so I know the answer, but I think one of our team members may want to jump in. So if you opt into the non-congregate, the meal service time, and we highly encourage you to also opt into the parent guardian pickup, that would allow you to feed both the kids who are in your school and also the kids that are enrolled in your district that you would normally feed, to be able to pick those meals up, or even if you want to deliver them or provide those meals to them in a different way, for them to be able to get to them, you can certainly do that. But you're going to need to opt into all of those three waivers. Another question is, if you opt into non-congregate during one time of the year, and are you allowed to opt out of it at a later time? So very specifically, those the waivers that we are able to give you the ability to elect into are the meal service time waiver, the non-congregate, the parent pickup, the offer versus serve for high schools to not to require the offer versus serve, and then the meal pattern. Those are the only 5 things we're able to authorize you to do at this time, and those are all different. So if you want your remote learners to be able to get meals at any time, even for multiple days, and you want their parents or guardians to be able to pick that up, you're going to need to opt into the meal service time waiver, the non-congregate, and the parent pickup. As far as we know, there is no opt back out of these. You can opt into them and then choose whether or not how you're going to implement those. But if you do opt into them and you opt into non-congregate, you will be responsible for making sure that you offer meals to all of your learners, regardless of whether they are in school or not. So please keep that in mind. So there's not really an opt out, but when you opt in, then you are obligated underneath those requirements that come along with that waiver to follow those. But if you have all of your kids in school and you're able to feed them in a congregate way, and you've still selected that non-congregate waiver, there's nothing preventing you from feeding them also in school. So we have another question about potable water. If we are opening next week, we must supply potable drinking water in every location where our students are eating breakfast and lunch. And I'm going to hand this off to one of our consultants, since I know that they know the potable drinking requirements, potable water access requirements far better than I do. So if any of you want to jump in.
Okay. So as Shannon said, the regulations as they stand is that the potable water is required. So if you are opening next week for lunch and serving in the cafeteria or in the classroom in school, you are required to comply with that regulation. I would encourage you to contact your local health department and look at the regulations or the guidelines around potable water that they're providing. We have heard that certain water fountains are being turned off and different things like that. If you need additional information how you're going to meet this regulation, reach out to your county consultant. But for breakfast in the classroom, it is not required. So again, for lunch, it's any location on the school premises. You're not required for the potable water for any of your virtual learners. So lunch in school, in the cafeteria or the classroom. For breakfast, it is not required for anything outside of the cafeteria. If breakfast is being offered in the cafeteria, the requirement does state that you must comply with the potable water requirement. Okay, so I think I covered that. And then I just wanted to add that preschool question, that individual can reach out directly to the consultant, because I interpreted that a little differently, and I'm not sure that if we have answered that fully, so they can reach out directly to your consultant to provide support there.
That sounds great. So that, I just want to reiterate too, my answer around that is that my understanding of the question is if you have a mix, basically a hybrid model, can you still feed the kids who are remote? So this may be a very specific circumstance, so definitely reach out to your school nutrition consultant and don't take that as a uniform answer in specific to pre-K students. So it looks like there is not too many questions left. So if you do have some questions, we'll give you a few more minutes to be able to add those in.
I wanted to just talk about a couple of things if there are more questions, we'll just take up a few more minutes. So I wanted to talk about the issue of food allergies in schools. Just know that there are a lot of questions. We're getting a lot of questions and a lot of concerns around the management of food allergies in schools, particularly for those of you who are planning on serving meals in the classroom. And just know that we sent out in the FAQ, we sent out guidance to indicate that all of the requirements under meal modification still apply for all of the meals that you're serving. It's especially challenging, I imagine, when you've got food allergic kids and you're trying to do meals in the classroom. But please make sure that you're paying extra attention to that. Please make sure that you're not ostracizing those kids with once somebody asked the question to me via email and asked if it was okay if they put all the food allergic kids in one room for lunch. No, not okay. So just please make sure you're paying close attention to that. I know many of you have peanut-free environments, but just please be sure you're being extra vigilant around those things. In addition, I know some of you are talking about providing meals to go at the certain parts of the day for those kids to take those meals home. You want to make sure that you're reiterating the bus rules around not eating on the bus. You want to make sure that you don't have allergens in those packages that are going home. So again, just a shout out for that. I'm going to have a conversation with some advocates on that this week, and I want to be able to tell them that we had a conversation. And so if you're having challenges with that, please reach out to your county consultant and or if you have some really good solutions about what you're doing around managing food allergies in schools, we would really love to hear that and be able to get that out to everybody. So thanks.
Thanks so much, John. So I just, we had some further thoughts on the question around whether you can feed pre-K kids or not. So I want to take this opportunity to reiterate that the programs going into once your academic school year begins are school breakfast and school lunch. We only have the authority to waive the 5 different areas of regulations that I already covered. So that's the meal service time, the parent pickup, parent guardian pickup, the non-congregate, the offer versus serve for high schools, and also for the meal pattern under the targeted and necessary specific reasons that you'll be telling us. These programs do not operate how you've been operating or how you operated during unanticipated school closures last March, which means that you are not able to feed any child under 18 under these programs. The child must be eligible for receiving those school breakfast and school lunch programs in order to receive meals from you this school year. That's regardless of whether they're in school, they're remote, whether the district goes virtual. Just really keep in mind that you need to be accountable for claiming and for keeping track and for holding all of the other rules and regulations that come with school breakfast and school lunch, which are very different than the summer food service program. A little bit more different from seamless summer option, which is part of the National School Lunch Program, but this is not we do not have the ability to authorize you to serve any child who's 18 and younger. These are the regular school breakfast and school lunch program rules.
So some schools decide not to serve preschool and that has been past practice because maybe they're there for an hour or 2 hours. So when you're completing your online application, maybe you don't check off preschool even though preschool children attend that school. So I think that question that came in, maybe the decision is to not serve preschool. Maybe they're there for a half an hour, an hour, whatever the reason is, which has happened in the past, not just specific to this current time. So if you are not serving or not electing to feed preschool children in school, then I believe based on the regulations, they would not then just have access as a remote learner. So you would, if you're going to make a decision to feed those students, then the children that are in school. Again, if you need more detail around the preschool, reach out directly to your county consultant so we can work through that. There was another question that came in about potable water. I'm not sure if I covered that when I spoke, but if you have a shortened day and are allowing students to take lunch home, that is, the intent is because of the shortened day, they will be nourishing themselves as they're continuing with their distant learning, then it would cover the fact that they are virtual learning with that lunch at home. And so I believe that you would not be required to send them home with a lunch. Again, they're now a distant learner, a virtual learner, so they're not eating in the school, in the cafeteria, or in the classroom. And my colleagues can correct me if they interpreted that in any other way.
No, that's correct, because the purpose of the potable water is for when children are consuming the meal in school, in the cafeteria, right? So when they're taking that meal out of school, right, the potable water requirement, you know.
You can encourage them to have a glass at home.
Yeah, sure.
And then I think there was, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So so we do have another question about the meal service time waiver, and for those shortened operating days, if this is something that is allowable to be implemented. So I'll let you take that one.
So yes, the mealtime flexibility waiver would cover not complying with the federal regulations to serve lunch between the hours of 10 and 2 and breakfast at the start of the school day. So that will allow you to deviate and go beyond that regulation and still be in compliance. So certainly you need to consider the amount of time groups are eating and what is appropriate for that age grade group to have lapse between breakfast and lunch. But we definitely understand, and that's why there are these flexibilities that you can implement and still be in compliance with the regulations. But yes, it will cover that.
Okay, thank you so much, Fanil. I appreciate that. So we just have a few minutes left. If you have any burning questions you want to add in, certainly let us know. We are working on another round of question answer documents to be able to send out. So we are taking some of these questions and we will be adding those into the document probably in a more general way. But we have been collecting questions from the field. So just please know that we hope to be able to provide some additional questions and answers to you in writing in due time. So we have another question around remote learning and being able to pick up. Do they need to pick up every day, or can they pick up multiple meals for multiple days, and how you claim that properly? And then I'm not sure if one of you wants to take that and then talk about the waivers that will need to be opted into in order to allow that. So Susan?
Do you want me to? Yep. So you can, right? So if you're going to do a multiple day distribution, sort of like you may have done during the summer, where you're providing, a few meals, say on Monday, to cover them from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that is allowed. That would require the non-congregant waiver, the mealtime waiver, and possibly your parent pickup. So you'd want to be able to opt into those. In asking about how do you claim that properly, that's going to be something that you have to work through at a district level or at a site level. So we've heard of people who will be doing that, for those meals doing their roster system, right, then they're going to have to go back and enter that into their point of sale system on each specific day, right? Because most point of sale systems don't allow you to enter in multiple meals for a student at the same time. So that's what we encourage you to maybe talk to your point of sale software people to see if there is a way that they can allow this, right? Where you would go in and you would check that this child took a meal and that meal is for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But it's really going to be on a district level how to best do that, right? Because you can't put 3 meals in for one day. Most likely in a point of sale, it's going to say you have 1 meal and then 2 second meals. So you'll have to kind of work through that with your software.
Thank you, Susan. So we do have another question around if you do not elect the non-congregate meal service waiver, are you still allowed to do grab and go? The answer is no. So if you are not allowed to do grab and go under the school breakfast and school lunch program regular rules, then you will not be allowed to do this unless you elect into the nationwide waiver. So please know, again, we have only the authority under these 5 different areas to allow you flexibilities currently. So that's all I can really elaborate on that, but certainly reach out to your consultant if you have additional questions or need to troubleshoot any of that. We have another question here around on the 4 days we have in-school learning. They'll be offering grab and go from 12:30 to 1 and offering both lunch and breakfast. And so again, that's that if you're offering both meals at the same time, you need that meal service waiver. If those children are going to be able to take those meals off site, you'll need to be able to do the non-congregate waiver. If you want the ability for parents or guardians to be able to pick up, so if you have, you could look at the ability to not only send meals home with students who are there in person, but then have a different distribution or meal pickup location for your remote learners. Those are items that you're very likely going to want to consider opting into that parent guardian pickup, since not every child will be able to pick that up if they're not leaving school with it. You also, if that child's not in attendance the day that you are distributing those meals to them, as they are on their way out the door, you're likely going to want to make those available for them to pick up at a different time. And again, we'd encourage you to do that parent guardian pickup. But in that circumstance, you would need all 3 waivers for the meal service time, the parent guardian pickup, and also the non-congregate. So anytime a child's taking those meals off site, anytime that you are serving more than 1 meal at a time for that child to be able to bring home with them, or you're giving them lunch and then giving them breakfast because you have a half day in school and then a half day virtual, and so you want to be able to provide them those meals, you're going to need to look at, would this be allowable under normal school breakfast, school lunch rules? And if it's not, it's very likely you're going to need to opt into one of those waivers. All right. So we have just a minute left, and I know we ran over last time. We were not as good about keeping track of the time, and you'll see you heard my alarm going off, so we stayed on track this time. So lessons learned each time we do these. But I just want to, again, as I always do, thank our tremendous staff for all the work they're doing, and thank you out there for all of the work you're doing to make sure that students and households have the stability and the ability, the predictability of safe, reliable, nutritious food that you're providing them every single day. And we can't thank you enough for all of the work that you're doing to make that happen. So John, if you have any final words, you're the boss, so you can end it.
No, same thing. Thanks to our team here, is just doing a tremendous job and has been throughout this whole thing. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. And again, I'm just going to keep saying, make sure you're part of the conversations that are happening in your districts. There are a lot of conversations with local health, a lot of conversations with school nurses, school medical advisors. Make sure you're in the room when the decisions are being made, because I think we need to make sure that folks who are making those decisions understand the ramifications that they have on the child nutrition program. So just get yourself in the room. All right, thanks everybody, appreciate it. Next week, as my colleague Chris Soto says, same bat time, same bat channel.
Slightly different time. It's going to be at 2 to 3 next week, but otherwise, right channel.
All right, thanks.
Bye.